Imagine leaving home for 3 days and coming back to find your private ranch road turned into a glossy suburban boulevard. Street lamps, painted curbs, decorative plants that didn't belong within 100 miles of cattle country. That's exactly what happened to me. I owned the road. It was mine, always had been, but my HOA neighbors, they decided it was theirs, and when I found out, well, let's just say they learned what happens when you pave over the wrong man's land. Before I get into it, do me a favor. If you love these HOA nightmare stories where regular folks like us fight back, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who can't stand HOA bullies. Trust me, this one is worth it. When I left for that livestock expo, my gravel ranch road was just fine. Dusty, bumpy, sure, but it had been there for decades. A simple track cutting across my 53 acres, connecting my ranch to the highway. Now, it wasn't just a road, it was the shortcut. See, years back, their HOA president begged me to let them use it. Said it saved her neighbors 5 minutes on the way to town. I didn't think much of it. We shook hands. No contract, no payment, just neighborly goodwill. And for years, that was it. They used my road, I didn't mind. But when I came back from that expo, it was gone. The dust and gravel were replaced with perfect black asphalt, fresh tar smell still in the air. White curbs framed the sides. Decorative lampposts lined the edges like a parade route. It wasn't a ranch road anymore. It was a manicured boulevard, and taped to my gate was a letter, just one sheet of paper, folded neatly. I can still remember the words. In accordance with community beautification standards, the road has been upgraded for the benefit of all residents. Residents. I wasn't one of them. My ranch wasn't part of their HOA. My property had never been under their jurisdiction. They didn't ask. They didn't call. They didn't knock on my door. They just came onto my land, paved over it, and taped up a smug little letter like they were doing me a favor. Now, let me paint you the picture. On one side, my ranch, real country. Dust, cattle, tractors, the kind of land where you work until your back aches and your boots wear thin. On the other side, their HOA community. Pastel-colored houses, manicured hedges, imported palm trees that don't even belong in this climate. Fake perfection. And cutting right between us? My road. The line where country life ended and suburbia began. I was furious, but fury is best served with patience. See, while they were busy patting themselves on the back for their beautification project, they forgot one crucial detail. That road wasn't public. It was mine. And in the corner of my equipment shed, I had something they didn't plan for. A heavy-duty cattle gate, 10 feet tall, solid steel, bolts thicker than a man's wrist. That night I hitched it to my tractor, rolled it across the new blacktop, and anchored it down tight. By sunrise, the HOA shortcut was gone. Company TAWS. Within hours, my phone started ringing. First the HOA secretary, then their legal counsel, both demanding I remove the gate immediately. I told them the truth. They had trespassed. They had altered my property without consent, and now they could go the long way around. Simple as that. The next day, she showed up. Linda, their president. She pulled into my driveway in a polished SUV, pearl necklace glinting in the sun, fake smile plastered across her face. She looked more like a country club hostess than someone who belonged in ranch country. "Ryan," she said, voice dripping with condescension, "you're blocking a public roadway." Public roadway? I pulled out my property deed, survey maps, every piece of paper that proved otherwise. Not public. Never was. You've been using it because I allowed it. That ends today. Her smile cracked, just a little. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. she snapped. I leaned against my tractor, arms crossed, and smiled back. You'll be hearing from the sheriff. Company loss. Because what Linda didn't know was that I had already filed a property destruction complaint. I had drone footage of the road before and after, proof of unauthorized alterations, proof of trespassing, and I had already sent it all to the local news. So while she was threatening me with her HOA lawyers, I was sitting on evidence that could bury her. That was the beginning. The barricade wasn't just a gate, it was a line in the sand, a declaration that the HOA's reign of intimidation didn't reach my land. But the fight that came next? That would turn neighbors against neighbors, expose fraud, and end with me cashing checks for the rest of my life. After I slammed that steel gate across my road, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd realize their mistake, that they'd back down, apologize, and figure out another way to get to town. But you know how HOA presidents are. They don't back down. They double down. And Linda Hale? She was the queen of doubling down. The morning after I bolted that gate, my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. First call, the HOA secretary. Second call, a man who introduced himself as legal counsel for the Pine Meadows Community Association. By lunchtime, I'd gotten 5 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. They all demanded the same thing. Remove the gate immediately. You're blocking a public roadway. Public? I laughed out loud, sitting in my kitchen. Not once, not ever. That road had been private since the day my grandfather carved it into the dirt with his old Caterpillar bulldozer. And now, they had the audacity to call it public? Not a chance. By the second day, it wasn't just calls. It was threats. Letters showed up in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's letterhead. Failure to remove obstruction will result in fines. Community reserves the right to take legal action. Your obstruction of this roadway is a safety hazard. Every page ended with Linda's polished signature, like she was signing a declaration of war. And if that wasn't enough, the HOA newsletter, yes, they had a monthly newsletter, suddenly featured an entire page dedicated to uncooperative landowners endangering community harmony. I didn't even have to guess who they meant. Then came the in-person visit. Linda pulled up in her spotless SUV, pearl necklace glittering in the sun. This time, she brought backup, Richard, her vice president, and Marcia, the treasurer. Both of them dressed like they'd just stepped out of a suburban real estate brochure. They marched up my gravel driveway like an army on parade, clipboards in hand, plastic smiles plastered across their faces. "Ryan," Linda began, her voice syrupy sweet, "we're here to resolve this little misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That word set me off. "There's no misunderstanding," I said flatly. "You trespassed. You paved my road without permission. And now you're mad because I reminded you it's mine." Her smile dropped. Not community, not access point, not liability. Mine. And until you fix what you broke, that gate stays locked. Richard muttered something under his breath about legal precedent. Marcia scribbled on her clipboard like she was tallying points in a game. And then, Linda snapped. You don't know who you're dealing with, Ryan. We will win this. I smiled. You paved the wrong road. By day 3, the residents themselves were furious. But not at me, at their own HOA. The 5-minute shortcut they loved was now a 20-minute detour. Parents were late dropping their kids at school, commuters sat in traffic longer, delivery drivers cursed under their breath when they realized they had to reroute. And every single one of them wanted answers. The HOA board tried to spin it. They sent out emails claiming I had unreasonably restricted access to a road that was implied public use. But people weren't buying it, because they remembered. They remembered the handshake deal years ago, the one Linda herself had begged me for. Everyone knew it was my road. Everyone knew I had let them use it out of kindness. And kindness only lasts until it's abused. Still, the HOA wouldn't give up. By the end of the week, they filed a lawsuit demanding I remove the gate. They claimed I had unjustly enriched myself by denying them access. Unjustly enriched? If anything, I'd been robbed. They paved over my gravel road without paying a dime. But I wasn't worried, because I had already filed my own complaint with the sheriff for property destruction. And I had something even better. Drone footage. High-resolution video showing the gravel road before, the bulldozers and asphalt trucks rolling in, and the finished boulevard, gleaming in the sun. No consent, no permits, no paperwork. Just evidence. And when I sent that footage to the local news station, the story blew up. HOA paves over rancher's private road without permission. The headline hit like wildfire. Neighbors called me. Strangers emailed me. Reporters wanted interviews. And suddenly, the HOA wasn't just fighting me. They were fighting the court of public opinion. But Linda didn't back down. She doubled her efforts. She called emergency meetings. She rallied residents. She even went on the local news herself, pearl necklace shining under the studio lights, insisting they had every right to upgrade the road. Her performance might have fooled some, but for the residents stuck with a 20-minute they were angry. And anger spreads fast. Pretty soon, whispers turned into shouting matches at community gatherings. Neighbors yelled at board members in the street. Someone even spray-painted "Not Your Road" across one of the decorative lampposts the HOA had installed. The very people Linda claimed to represent were turning on her. Meanwhile, I stayed patient. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. All I had to do was wait. Because every day the gate stayed closed, the pressure mounted. And the more Linda fought me, the more her residents fought her. Then came the breaking point. One evening, just after sunset, I heard commotion by the gate. Headlights flickered. Voices rose. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the road. And what I saw made my blood boil. 3 HOA board members, not just residents, actual board members, were trying to cut through my cattle gate with bolt cutters. When my flashlight beam hit them, they froze like kids caught stealing candy. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. They stammered, muttered something about community rights. I snapped photos with my phone, called the sheriff on the spot. By the time deputies arrived, the board members were shaking in their loafers, trespassing, attempted property damage, criminal charges, right there in black and white. And the sheriff? He knew the truth. He'd seen my documents. He knew the road was mine. He slapped citations into their hands and warned them never to set foot on my property again. That was the night the tide turned. The residents had been angry before, but once news spread that board members had been caught cutting my gate in the dark, that anger turned into outrage. They weren't just frustrated anymore, they were embarrassed. Their HOA had gone from protecting property values to sneaking around like criminals. And suddenly, all eyes were on Linda. But Linda, stubborn as ever, refused to resign. She doubled down yet again, insisting I was extorting the community. Extorting? If she thought that, she hadn't seen anything yet. Because by then, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let them tear up the asphalt. I wasn't going to let them return it to gravel. No, I was going to make them pay for it. Literally. And that decision, to turn their shortcut into a paycheck, would be the beginning of their ultimate downfall. The HOA war had just gone from conflict to business. And the contract I had in mind, it was going to cost them more than they ever imagined.
By the time the sheriff handed those board members their trespassing citations, the story had already slipped out of the HOA's control. Word spread faster than they could manage. Residents were furious, local reporters wanted answers, and every day that the gate stayed locked, frustration boiled hotter. I knew then that the HOA wasn't just my enemy anymore. They had turned their own people against them. But still, I wasn't satisfied. They had trespassed, destroyed my gravel road, poured asphalt without permission, and then tried to cut my gate down in the dead of night. That wasn't just arrogance. That was criminal. I wasn't going to settle for them slinking away in embarrassment. I wanted them accountable. So I took the fight to the courthouse. The HOA filed their lawsuit first, demanding I take down the gate. Their argument was simple. Because they had used the road for years, they believed they had established implied easement rights. To them, years of neighborly goodwill meant ownership. But my lawyer, Charles Denton, shredded that argument in minutes. Easements require contracts, legal agreements, signatures. I had never signed a thing. All they had was entitlement dressed up as precedent. Then we countersued. We filed for property destruction, trespass, and damages. We attached drone footage showing the paving trucks rolling in. We submitted my grandfather's original survey maps and the property deed. And just to twist the knife, we attached the sheriff's report documenting the HOA board's attempt to cut my cattle gate with bolt cutters. In legal terms, the case wasn't even close. The first court hearing was packed. Reporters, residents, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see how it would unfold. Linda arrived flanked by her attorney, still wearing her pearls and her carefully pressed suit. She tried to smile, but her confidence was cracking. Her once loyal neighbors sat behind me, whispering, glaring at her. When the judge entered, silence fell. The HOA's lawyer argued first, painting me as an obstructionist landowner who had cruelly locked the community out of their right of access. He called me unreasonable, selfish, and combative. But then Charles stood, calm as ever, and dropped the evidence like a hammer. The permit from the 1960s. The tax receipts proving I had maintained the road for decades. Drone video showing the HOA trucks trespassing. The sheriff's citations against the board members. When he finished, the courtroom was buzzing. The judge leaned forward and asked Linda's attorney a simple question. Can you show me any document, any contract, any legal filing that proves this road was ever public? The lawyer shuffled his papers, stammered, and finally admitted he could not. That was the first crack in the HOA's armor. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust in my face. I kept it simple. I let them use the road out of goodwill. They abused that goodwill. Now they're paying the price. By the 6 o'clock news, the narrative was clear. This wasn't a greedy rancher hoarding land. This was a homeowner standing up to HOA tyranny. Public opinion swung hard against Linda and her board. But the real battle was just beginning. The judge issued a temporary injunction. The gate would stay until the case was resolved. The HOA couldn't touch it, couldn't force me to remove it. That meant their shortcut was gone for months, maybe longer. Residents snapped. They stormed HOA meetings demanding answers. They booed board members out of the room. The once pristine Pine Meadows community was tearing itself apart. One resident stood up during a meeting and shouted, "You paved over his road without permission, and now we're paying the price. Step down." Others followed, chanting for resignations. Linda tried to restore order with her gavel, but the sound was drowned out by shouting voices. Her own empire was crumbling from within. I could have stopped there. I could have let the legal system run its course. But I wanted something more permanent. So I drafted a proposal. The HOA could keep their fancy boulevard. The lampposts, the painted curbs, the asphalt that gleamed in the sun. It could stay. But it wouldn't be free. If they wanted to use my road, they would sign a rental contract. $4,000 a month, due on the 1st. Miss one payment? The gate locks and stays locked. I showed the contract to Charles. He raised an eyebrow, then smirked. It's brutal. I like it. At the next court-ordered mediation, I presented the deal. Linda nearly choked. "This is extortion," she snapped. Charles leaned forward. "No, Mrs. Hale. This is business. You upgraded a man's property without consent. You destroyed his gravel road and replaced it with asphalt. Now you want to keep using it. He is simply charging fair market rent." Linda's face turned crimson. She sputtered, but she knew the truth. She had no leverage. The residents wanted that road open. The longer it stayed closed, the angrier they became. Every day the detour cost them gas, time, frustration, and the news coverage only made it worse. The board was cornered. 2 weeks later, they signed. The Pine Meadows Homeowners Association entered into a legally binding contract to rent my road. For $4,000 a month, checks arrived in my mailbox, every month, like clockwork. And just like that, their shortcut became the most expensive 5 minutes in the entire county. But the battle didn't end with the contract, because once the financial audit began, more skeletons tumbled out of the HOA's closet. The treasurer had been quietly siphoning funds. Landscaping projects billed at twice their value. Community outreach that turned out to be vacations for board members. The audit exposed it all. Residents, already furious, demanded a vote. One by one, the board members resigned. Some in disgrace, some under threat of criminal investigation. Linda clung to power as long as she could, but by the end of the month, she too was gone. Her resignation letter, pinned to the community bulletin board, was short and bitter. "I did what I thought was best for this community. History will judge my actions." History didn't need to judge. The residents already had. With the board dissolved, the community reorganized. A new leadership team was voted in. Younger, fairer, transparent. They simplified the rules, cut back. The endless fines and, most importantly, they kept paying me. Because no matter who ran the HOA, one fact remained. The only road into their neighborhood still belonged to me. And that road, thanks to Linda's arrogance, had become my personal cash cow. I could have restored it to gravel. I could have ripped up the asphalt, planted grass, and erased the boulevard. But I didn't. I let it stand. Because every month, when I deposit their check, I remember the smug letter they taped to my gate. In accordance with community beautification standards, the road has been upgraded for the benefit of all residents. Now every benefit comes with a price tag. $4,000 every 30 days. And every time I drive my tractor past their pretty lampposts, I can't help but smile. The battle was over. The HOA had lost. But the lesson would last forever. You don't mess with a man's land. You don't pave over his road. And you sure as hell don't think you can win when the deed is in his pocket. When the ink dried on that contract, I thought I had finally closed the book on the HOA's nonsense. They had paved over my road, tried to claim it, tried to bully me into compliance. And now, thanks to their arrogance, they were paying me $4,000 a month just to drive across it. But if there's one thing I've learned about HOAs, it's this. They never stop digging. Even when the hole is already deep enough to bury them, they keep going, clawing down into the dirt, convinced they'll find a way out. And Pine Meadows was no different. The contract forced them to pay, but it also forced them to open their books. Residents wanted to know where their money was going. For years, dues had risen steadily, fines had piled up, community improvements had been promised but never delivered. Nobody had asked too many questions before. But now that they were paying me nearly $50,000 a year to rent a road that was never theirs, the questions came hard and fast. Where had their money been going before? Why were they suddenly short on reserves? How could they justify this expense when basic neighborhood maintenance had been neglected? The new board leadership tried to spin it. They claimed the financial struggles were temporary, that the road contract was an unfortunate but necessary expense. But the more they talked, the less the residents believed. Because when you peel back the curtain on an HOA, you never just find poor decisions. You find corruption. It started with the landscaping contracts. For years, Pine Meadows had paid nearly double the market rate for lawn services, hedge trimming, and flower beds at the community entrance. Residents assumed it was normal. Nice landscaping costs money, right? Except when the new treasurer dug deeper, she found that the landscaping company didn't exist. The checks had been made out to a shell company created by none other than the former treasurer, Marcia. The money had gone straight into her personal account, tens of thousands of dollars gone. Then came the community outreach expenses. At least $30,000 billed as neighborhood development retreats. The receipts told a different story. Luxury hotels, resort stays, spa treatments, all signed off by Linda and Richard. Vacations, disguised as business. The audit uncovered it. All, line after line of fabricated expenses, funneled through bogus vendors and rubber-stamped by a board that treated the HOA's budget like their personal piggy bank. The reaction was explosive. At the next community meeting, residents didn't just demand explanations. They demanded accountability. One man stood up and shouted, "I've lived here 15 years and never once saw the improvements you kept promising. Where did our money go, Linda?" "Where?" Another resident added. "We paid dues, we paid fines. We did everything you asked. And while we struggled, you were on vacation with our money?" The room turned into a roar of accusations. Linda tried to keep order, banging her gavel, insisting the allegations were unproven and out of context. But every time she spoke, another resident shouted her down. The HOA wasn't just losing credibility. It was imploding. For me, watching from the sidelines was almost surreal. I didn't even have to fight anymore. They were destroying themselves. But I wasn't about to let them drag their feet or sweep it under the rug. So I started releasing my own evidence, the drone footage. The photos of board members caught cutting my cattle gate. The sheriff's citations. I sent it all to reporters who eagerly tied it into the larger story of financial corruption. The headlines grew harsher. HOA paves over Ranchers Road, now facing fraud investigation. Pine Meadows Board accused of misusing funds. Residents revolt against leadership amid scandal. Public opinion wasn't just against them, it was annihilating them. The legal system caught up next. The county opened an investigation into the fraudulent shell companies. The Attorney General's office sent subpoenas. Board members were questioned under oath. Richard resigned within a week, citing personal stress. Marcia disappeared entirely, selling her house almost overnight. Linda clung to power as long as she could. But when investigators uncovered her signatures authorizing the fraudulent expenses, her position became untenable. She resigned in disgrace, her final act as president, a bitter statement claiming she had been misled by those around her. Nobody believed it. The reign of the old board was finished. But what came next was just as important. The community had a choice. They could dissolve the HOA entirely, or they could rebuild it. Dissolving would mean chaos, no shared maintenance, no pool or clubhouse management, no unified insurance. Some wanted it gone, burned to the ground, but others feared the uncertainty. In the end, they voted to rebuild. A new board was elected, this time with residents who actually lived in Pine Meadows for the community, not for power. Young families, retirees, even a school teacher who had never been involved before but wanted to help. The new leadership slashed the handbook in half, cutting out absurd regulations and contradictory rules. They ended the endless fines for trivial things like mailbox height or porch lights. And they promised full transparency, publishing every expense online for residents to see. For the first time, Pine Meadows looked less like a dictatorship and more like a neighborhood. As for me, I remained exactly where I'd always been, the man with the road. The contract stayed in place. The checks kept arriving. $4,000 a month, paid on time, every time. The residents grumbled about it at first. Nobody likes paying extra. But eventually, even they had to admit the truth. Their HOA had brought it on themselves. If they hadn't trespassed, if they hadn't paved without asking, they wouldn't be paying a dime. It was Linda's arrogance, Richard's smugness, Marcia's greed that had turned their shortcut into my personal income stream, and I wasn't about to let them forget it. There were moments when I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. When I saw parents struggling with higher dues, when I heard retirees complain about the cost, I wondered if maybe I should let it go. But then I remembered the letter taped to my gate, the one that read, "In accordance with community beautification standards, the road has been upgraded for the benefit of all residents." That smug, arrogant sentence was the reason I cashed every check with a smile, because they hadn't upgraded their road. They had upgraded mine. And now, I was the one benefiting. Over time, something unexpected happened. The residents stopped resenting me and started respecting me. Some even thanked me. They told me that if I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't exposed the corruption, the old board would still be bleeding them dry with fake expenses and endless fines. One man shook my hand and said, "You didn't just save your road, Ryan. You saved this community." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't trying to save anyone but myself. But maybe that's how these things work. You stand your ground for yourself, and others find the courage to do the same. The longer I thought about it, the more I realized what the road had come to represent. It wasn't just asphalt. It wasn't just a shortcut. It was a boundary, a line they had crossed without permission, a symbol of how power corrupts when left unchecked. By locking that gate, I hadn't just stopped cars. I had stopped arrogance. I had stopped entitlement. I had stopped a machine that thought it could roll over anyone in its path. And when the truth came out, when the old board fell apart, when justice was served, that road became something more. It became proof that bullies only win if you let them, of course. The fight left scars. Some neighbors still looked at me sideways when they drove past. Some muttered under their breath about the toll road. And I knew there would always be resentment. But resentment doesn't pay the bills. The contract did. Every month, another check. Another reminder that standing your ground is worth it. And as long as I live on this ranch, that gate, that road, that contract will remain. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how different things might have been if they had just asked. If Linda had walked up to my porch, hat in hand, and said, "Ryan, we'd like to pave the road. Would you allow it?" Maybe I would have agreed. Maybe I would have signed a contract for a fraction of what they pay now. Maybe we would have avoided the lawsuits, the news stories, the investigations. But she didn't ask. She took. And when people take without asking, they don't just lose what they wanted. They lose much more. For Linda, it was her position, her reputation, her legacy, For the HOA, it was their trust, their money, their stability. For me, it was a lesson I'll never forget. The turn had come. I was no longer the one on the defensive. I was no longer the man being harassed, threatened, and vilified. I was the one holding the cards. I was the one being paid. I was the one neighbors thanked quietly in the grocery store for standing up, and the HOA, they were the ones left to pick up the pieces of their broken empire. When the dust finally settled, Pine Meadows was a different place. The old guard was gone, Linda with her pearls, Richard with his smug smirk, Marcia with her phantom landscaping contracts. They had strutted around like royalty for years, convinced. They were untouchable. Now they were reduced to cautionary tales, whispered about at barbecues, and warned about in hushed tones at community meetings. For months, you couldn't pass through the neighborhood without hearing their names spoken, with a mix of anger and disbelief. Can you believe she thought she could get away with that? All that money gone. How many vacations did they take on our dime? But me. I was no longer the villain, no longer the obstacle. I had become something else entirely. I had become the man who stood up, the man who drew a line, the man who proved the HOA didn't have unlimited power. It's funny looking back how quickly the narrative shifted. At first, I was the stubborn rancher, the guy who locked the gate and forced everyone to take the long way around. They cursed me. They muttered about me in HOA newsletters. They called me selfish, unreasonable, difficult. But once the fraud was exposed, once the old board collapsed, those same people started nodding at me in town. They shook my hand. They thanked me. One woman, a mother of 3, told me, if you hadn't fought back, they'd still be bleeding us dry. They'd still be fining us for every little thing. Still charging us for things that never got done. You saved us. I never set out to save anyone. I set out to save myself, my road, my land, my dignity. But sometimes, standing your ground doesn't just protect you, it inspires others. The road itself became a kind of legend. Every month, the HOA wrote me a check, $4,000 paid without fail. At first, they grumbled. Residents complained about the expense. Some even accused me of profiteering, but over time the anger faded. They realized it wasn't me who had forced the situation. It was Linda and her cronies. They were the ones who paved without permission. They were the ones who forced the contract, and the contract was ironclad. If they missed a single payment, the gate closed again. No excuses, no second chances. The road that had once been a shortcut became something else entirely. It became a toll road, a reminder. Every car that drove across it was driving on a lesson. The new board was smarter. They didn't fight me. They didn't argue. They accepted the deal, cut unnecessary expenses elsewhere, and focused on repairing the community's reputation. They simplified the rules. They stopped nitpicking residents over mailbox heights and porch decorations. They started listening. The HOA that once ruled with an iron fist now operated more like a neighborhood committee, collaborative, transparent, human. And oddly enough, I think that was part of my victory too, because my fight didn't just save my road. It broke the illusion. It showed people that rules aren't sacred just because someone in a blazer says they are. It reminded them that power has limits, and those limits are set by people willing to stand up. Sometimes I walk down to the gate in the evening when the sun is low and the lamp posts the HOA installed cast long shadows across the asphalt. I lean on the fence and watch the cars pass, SUVs, sedans, minivans filled with kids, residents rushing home from work, tired, hungry, ready for dinner, and I smile. Not out of spite, not out of arrogance, but because I know the truth. They drive across that road every day because I allow it, not because of bylaws, not because of HOA authority, because I chose to fight back, and I chose to win. That's a kind of freedom most people don't understand until it's taken from them. It's easy to feel small in the face of organizations like HOAs, They thrive on intimidation, on making you believe you don't have a choice, on drowning you in rules and fines and legal threats until you finally give up. But here's the secret I learned. They only have as much power as you let them. When you push back, when you demand proof, when you drag their threats into the light of day, suddenly they don't look so powerful anymore. They look desperate, vulnerable, weak. That's what Linda looked like when she signed the contract. Not the Queen of Pine Meadows, not the enforcer of rules. Just a woman caught in her own web, forced to admit she had overplayed her hand. I kept the original letter they taped to my gate. It's framed now, hanging in my office. The one that read, "In accordance with community beautification standards, the road has been upgraded for the benefit of all residents." Those words, dripping with arrogance, changed my life. Every month when the check clears, I glance at that frame and laugh, because their so-called beautification didn't benefit their residents. It benefited me. What they thought was their triumph became my legacy. Neighbors still ask me sometimes if I'll ever lift the contract, if I'll ever let the road go back to gravel or allow it to be used freely again. My answer is always the same: no. Because it's not about the money. It's about the principle. They took without asking. They tried to rewrite reality. They thought they could roll over me because they were an organization and I was just one man. But one man, with the right evidence and the right resolve, can turn an entire community upside down. That's the lesson I want remembered. Years from now, when I'm gone, maybe my daughter will inherit this ranch. Maybe she'll inherit the contract too. And when she does, I hope she remembers what it represents. Not greed, not revenge, but strength. The strength to stand your ground. The strength to say no when everyone else says give in. The strength to fight, not just for yourself, but for the principle that no one can take what's yours without a fight. That road is more than asphalt. It's more than a shortcut. It's a reminder that freedom isn't given. It's defended, and that's a legacy worth more than any check. So here's my question for you. What would you do if your HOA paved over your land without asking? Would you fold? Would you fight? Would you let them dictate your life? Or would you lock the gate and force them to pay the price? If you've ever lived through an HOA nightmare, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to know they're not powerless. Because the more these stories spread, the less power HOAs have to bully homeowners into silence. And trust me, there's nothing sweeter than watching the bully lose.